Dear Heavenly Father, we just thank you for this opportunity to come together today. Lord, we ask that you bring your spirit here to guide our minds, help us to have an understanding of the times we're living in, help us understand the dangers of really the where we're living in. And we just ask, Lord, that you give us insights and guidance. Throughout this, Lord, we want to be awakened by a sense of urgency, but we also do not desire to be making decisions out of fear. So, Father, we just ask that you give us a sense of peace, even through some of the more alerting slides, alerting facts. In Jesus' name we pray, amen. Okay, so let's get my screen shared out. Today's conversation is about country living. So I wanted to cover a number of items ranging from why we need country living to the motivation behind country living, the challenges that are faced, looking into an outpost, what is an outpost, and then really ending with the reaffirming the mindset necessary for country living. We read in the writings of Ellen White, she repeatedly tells us and urges the advantages of country living. There's a lot of reasons for this. And I think just to list a few, we'll see that we need protection from temptation and perversion. When we look into the false and artificial worlds that are created outside of nature, there's a reason for this. If Lucifer can remove the image of God from our eyes, he can remove it from our characters. And this is his plan. He knows that if we can be distracted by the world, if we can be drawn in by false and artificial life, an intense passion for gaining money, excitement, pleasure-seeking, and a thirst for display, that will turn minds from the life's true purpose. And I understand we just did our talk last night on present truth, understanding the importance of really the role that we have to bring. And we're not going to be able to be that role. We're not going to be able to reflect Christ in a city environment. We read that there are doors opening to 1,000 evils. Upon the youth, they have irresistible power. One of the most subtle and dangerous temptations is that of pleasure and being caught up in a world of excitement. We start looking through this terrible picture of the condition of the world has been presented before me. So Ellen White is already seeing what we live in today. Culture of consumerism, drunkenness, perversion, those that are losing our empathy because we are almost becoming callous to what's around us. Unhealthy habits. We read the gratification of unnatural appetite led to the sins that caused the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. So ultimately, it's the unnatural appetite and gratifying that leads to this. It's gluttony, drunkenness, indulgence, passion. And it will happen again, this destruction. The coming of the Lord is nearer than we believed. The great controversy is nearing its end. Wars and rumors of wars declare it. Is there a Christian whose pulse does not beat with quickened action as he anticipates the great events opening before us? The Lord is coming. We hear the footsteps of an approaching God as he comes to punish the world for its iniquities. And we understand that it's not actually God punishing the world. We understand that it's actually a removal of protection. We've talked about a little bit about the wrath of God. When we think about the distance from unrest and destruction, right, we see how there has been so much chaos, especially in our cities. The spirit of unrest, riot, bloodshed, this will involve the whole world in the struggle. Serious troubles are before us, and the removal from the cities will become a necessity. Ellen White goes on, and seeing in a vision, she says, "Oh, that God's people had a sense of the impending destruction of thousands of cities, now almost given into idolatry." And so the time is near when large cities will be visited by the judgments of God. Right now, as we speak, there's massive fires in Los Angeles. Like all over the world, cities are being, the hand of God, the protection of God is being withdrawn from these massive cities. And we see these events happening today.
This is not the plagues.
Not the plagues.
And this is different from the natural disaster that was here. Or is it just the...
So when we think about what this is, we see that God is removing his protection. As that happens, Lucifer comes in. There's many other quotes in a different presentation that the earth is not, that natural order is actually control of God. That things don't just happen on their own. God actually leads everything to happen. He's moving everything. And so when God starts to remove that protection, Lucifer comes in and claims that. As that happens, we're going to see different time periods. The time period we're in right now is God restraining the winds. And so he's actually, God is still protecting.
Like the 4 angels?
The 4 angels restraining the winds. And we read in Revelation that they were going to hold those winds until the elect is sealed, until the 144,000. So until there's a number, he's holding this back. But we see fires, earthquakes, tornadoes. There's all these natural disasters. And Ellen White says very clearly that those are Lucifer working those to his will. Lucifer is creating a sense of fear. Lucifer is also working through things like we understand climate change is actually, I believe, very much the workings of Lucifer, creating these processes, these systems in order to bring the Hegelian dialectic. We read that God will release ultimately his restraining power, but he's going to release it first on the cities. So he's going to hold the countries, he's going to hold these natural disasters longer in places where his children are at. But the same way he could not hold it forever in Sodom and Gomorrah, he will not be holding it here. He will punish cities and places where men have given themselves up to the possession of satanic agencies. Where Satan takes dominion over a location, God has no control. And strictly the cities and the nations will be dealt with. Now, there is also a time coming when the winds of strife are fully released, and those increased natural disasters will then be blamed on the Adventists. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. But this is talking about what's happening, what we see today. Satan will bring disease and disaster until populous cities are reduced to ruin and desolation. And she says here very clearly, he is now at work. This is not the plagues. Lucifer is doing this now in accidents, calamities by sea and land, and great conflations, in fiercest tornadoes and terrific hailstones, the tempest floods, cyclones, tidal waves, earthquakes. In every place, in 1,000 forms, Satan is exercising his power. But ere long, there'll be such strife and the confusion in the cities that those who wish to leave them will not be able. There's going to be a time soon when those who wish to leave the cities are simply not going to be able to leave. And this is so important to understand, is that we must be preparing now. And what's one of the reasons? One of the reasons is because right now we are so reliant on our supply chains. We're looking to man to provide for us instead of to God as we're instructed. And true education teaches us, come back to God and see what his desires for us are. We saw during COVID the dangers of supply chain issues. We see scarcity in the supermarkets. We see food shortages. We see also things like shrinkflation, where we're paying the same amount of money but getting less product, which is ultimately a cleverly disguised way for them maintaining profits. And what we're going to find is that much of this calamity that's about to come is going to be done not actually by natural disasters, but by the moneyed men. The shrinkflation we're happening right now is to increase profits, and that's their focus. Again and again, the Lord has instructed that our people are to take their families away from the cities into the countries, where they can what? Raise their own provisions. For in the future, the problem of buying and selling will be a serious one. And so we see that Ellen White has already told us, we know from the Bible, from Revelation even tells us, right? We know that there's going to be a time where no man can buy or sell unless he receive the mark. So there's this time prior to the Sunday law and a time after the Sunday law. Prior to the Sunday law, which is where we are now, we really need to be focusing on How can we start providing for ourselves? And this is one of the reasons of the importance of country living. The second reason, like I said, is that there will be manufactured problems. The moneyed men, because they have the power, control the market. They'll purchase at low rates that they can obtain and then sell at greatly increased prices. We see this throughout all of our different types of resources. But watch this. This means starvation to the poorer classes. And what will it result in? A civil war. So we know there's a civil war coming. Ellen White's already predicted that in other statements. She's predicted there will be yet another conflict. This civil war is coming. And it will be driven by a food shortage. Are we catching this? I know there's a lot of attention online right now about the second Esdras video I put out and how I predicted from that the assassination of Trump will, and ultimately events, will lead to a civil war. But Ellen White tells us that this will be the cause. The catalyst will be starvation of the poorest classes. Do we capture this? Like, we really need a clue on this. Because if we do not clue on this, then we're not going to be making the right decisions for our locations in the future. Starvation will be the cause of our civil war. Are we all catching? Like, seriously, if we don't understand this, we are not going to be ready. So who knows about this? Who are the moneyed men who are manipulating the market? Like, a lot of people know about Bill Gates, 280,000. That number is actually 280,000 acres. Ted Turner is the one we really need to be looking at, 2 million acres. And all these names, these very interesting names of why these people have so much land. AT&T, CNN, NHL, tobacco, Microsoft, Amazon. Why do they have so much acreage? Why do these men, who are seemingly have no interest in farming, have so much control over our agricultural system? The reason is because these will be the money men and others. Berkshire Hathaway is also involved in this. They will be the ones and others who will be ultimately creating shortages, unnatural shortages. The same way in the pandemic, there was a manufactured issue and then a manufactured solution. This is the manufactured issue. A great crisis awaits the people of God. A crisis awaits the world. And so we have to understand what this is going to be. It's going to start with a food crisis. It'll then result in the Civil War and then the National Sunday Law. This is the Hegelian dialectic at play.
Let's talk specifically about America, the Civil War.
It says here, a great crisis awaits the people of God. A crisis awaits the world, not just America, the world.
There's a civil war within a country.
Correct. She's talking about specifically in the United States. So we're going to see this idea of food shortages. So they're going to buy up the farmland, they're going to disrupt the supply chain, as well as natural disasters, which could be more than natural. Then that'll turn into a civil war, and then that will turn into a need for harmony. And so the synthesis of the thesis and the antithesis in the Hegelian dialectic, the synthesis will be a Sunday worship. A great crisis awaits the people of God. A crisis awaits the world. The most monumentous struggle of the ages is just before us. The question of an impending amendment to the Constitution, restricting the liberty of conscience, has been urged upon legislators of the nation. So we start to see that this crisis that waits the world is relating to restriction of liberty of conscience. And that's where that quote comes from. And so we have to really think about, is there instances of how our conscience can be limited by being in the cities? And this becomes the next one, freedom of conscience. We should now begin to heed the instruction given to us over and over again to get out of the cities into rural districts where the houses are not crowded closely together and where you'll be free from the interference of enemies. There will be levels of control. There will be, our freedom of conscience will be limited. And this is the reason why we need separation of church and state. This is the reason that our church should not be taking federal grants. This is the reason that we should not be any place where we can be coerced by the government. Because God never forces the will of the conscience. That's Satan's work. To gain control of those who he cannot otherwise seduce, it is compulsion by cruelty. And through fear or force, Satan endeavors to rule the conscience and secure the homage to himself. To accomplish this, he works through both religious and secular authorities, moving them to the enforcement of human laws in the defiance of God. Have we seen human laws recently defy freedom of conscience? Those who honor the biblical Sabbath will be denounced as enemies of law and order. As breaking down the moral restraints of society causes anarchy and corruption and calling down the judgments of God upon the earth. So they're going to blame all of the desolation that's happening. So there's an abomination in the cities. Abomination is always followed by desolation. If you abominate, God will then desolate. He will remove his protection. The same way that the Jews, abominated the worship system, Christ removed himself from the most holy place. The same thing is going to happen the way that we have in the cities. That's why the cities will be targeted. Cities will be targeted because that's where God is not present. His people are not there. And these judgments will then be applied to the Christians saying, oh, this is the Adventists, this is the Sabbath keepers. This is why these judgments are happening. But he calls here that the conscience, these conscientious scruples will be pronounced as obstinacy, stubbornness, and contempt of authority. So if you say, I want to keep the Sabbath, you're going to say you're just being stubborn. We need unity. If you say, I don't want a vaccination, you're being stubborn. We need unity. It's all the same theme. COVID literally was a test environment for what we're about to go into. And I believe that was our final warning. How well has our church stood up against government mandates? And what is going to happen when the Sunday law? If we're not taking a stand now, will we take a stand then? Now, the answer is yes. The answer will be yes, because this is God's final church. But I need to point out the seriousness of this matter. Because of the lack of separation of church and state, because we wanted government funding, this is why the church took a very light stance on COVID. And this is why we encouraged, ultimately, the vaccination. Now we say, well, we didn't encourage it. Well, we also didn't prevent against it. The official church statement was, the claims of religious liberty are not being used appropriately in objecting to government mandates in employer programs. So while they did put out a statement saying, oh, we think everyone should use their own conscience, they also said, but if you use your own conscience, we're not going to support you. These claims of religious liberty are not used appropriately in objecting to government mandates or employer programs. And so because of this statement and a lack for support for defending freedom of conscience, many people lost their jobs. Will we take a stand in the future? I believe the answer is yes, but I want to just point out that these are very, very close related. Claims of religious liberty are not being used appropriately in objection to government mandates. Claims of religious liberty are not being used appropriately in objecting to government mandates. And this time, what if it's about Sunday worship programs instead of COVID vaccination? Will we, in this hypothetical situation, will we take a stand? Will we reaffirm the Seventh-day Adventist Church's response to the National Sunday Law the same way we did COVID? We find that it will be declared that men are offending God by the violation of the Sunday Sabbath, and then that sin has brought calamities which will not cease until this observance be strictly enforced. Remember that the Sunday law is going to come initially just as like a fun thing. Hey, let's just have a green Sunday. But also, hey, let's also, the Civil War thing, let's try to have some unity. And then with the calamities on top of that, it'll say, because of this, we must enforce this more strictly. Satan puts his interpretation on events, and then the leading men think that they would, as him, that the calamities which fill the land are a result of Sunday breaking. So again, this is the incredible importance of understanding the importance of freedom of conscience and defending it now in all matters, because this is where we're heading. And where this is ultimately going is that this is going to then have, even right now, if even we're going to pull it back a little bit, so we know where it's going, but even pulling that back, right? And just to recap on those two pieces, one was the famine that's coming, the food shortage. The second is freedom of conscience for matters of our spiritual preference of when we serve the Lord. But even today, even those aside, the choice of being in the city right now is affecting our mental and physical health. When you think about what is the lifestyle associated with being in the city, Ellen White writes, shut within these four walls, it often seems that they are prisoners in their rooms. When they look out of a window, they see nothing but houses, houses, houses. This was not how we were intended to live. We cannot be shut up as prisoners. But if Lucifer can make us in these concrete jungles, we will not see the greenery. She goes further and says, the physical surroundings in these cities are often a peril to health. The constant liability to contact with disease, the prevalence of foul air, impure water, impure food, everything that God wants from us, he's created the counterfeit in the cities. Impure water, impure air, impure food. He's created literally counterfeit for everything so that he can defile our temple. What is abomination of desolation? Defilement of a temple. And this is abomination. And if we continue to abominate God's temple, it will be vacated. There will be desolation. It was not God's purpose that the people should be crowded into cities, huddled together in terraces. The more nearly we come into harmony with God's original plan, the more favorable will be our position to secure healthy body, mind, and soul. And so some of us are at this point where we feel like we're being fed up of being in the cities and we desire something more. As we look around, God did not design us to see concrete and advertisements every day. When we look up, we should be seeing nature. God designed us to see his creation and beauty and reflect them into our characters. By beholding the scenes of nature, the works of creation, by studying God's handiwork, imperceptibly you will be changed into the same image. That is a promise for us. By beholding, we become changed. And if we're looking at something else, if we're looking at cities, we're changed into cities. If we're looking at nature, we're changed into nature. And this ultimately directly impacts our spiritual health. In harmony with the light given me, I am urging people to come out from the great centers of population. Our cities are increasingly wickedness and becoming more and more evident that those who remain in them unnecessarily do so at the peril of their soul's salvation. Spiritual things are not valued and not sought after. We got to really look at this concept. We're literally in Egypt, but we don't get it. We know how Jacob took his family into Egypt because they needed prosperity. They needed a time of something that was, the famine came. That's why they went there. Had they stayed true to God, right? And multiply, we read here that because they remained, though, they weren't supposed to be there forever. Because they remained in these secular lands, the government saw that they were growing and could challenge them, so they enslaved them. And that's what we've seen. We've seen how systems have been placed around us to enslave us, to have our minds not understand who we are, to enslave us on supply chains. The Egyptians made the children of Israel serve with rigor. How many people are working with no purpose, no end in sight? We read, they commanded the same day the taskmasters of the people, saying, you shall not even give them straw to make it break. We're starting to see how all of these supports are being removed, to leading them to revolt. And so I challenge you to see if the taskmaster is still there. Maybe it's in the form of a corporate overlord, right, who wants to make life harder than we need to and have no energy to then to do any sort of revolution. That was our education system to stop us from revolting. Have we given up as a people? Have we accepted our fate as slaves in this world? How is it that we allow ourselves to be so enslaved by consumerism on these supply chains? If we look backwards, we'll see how we've entrusted our lives to systems which are rigged against us, systems who do not have our interest in mind, systems who take, but in return do not give any practical skills or guarantee of opportunity other than dependence on the supply chain, And we are warned that those who seek education from the world become educated worldlings. Even secular sources are questioning the value of the current educational system. This is the importance of true education, is getting out of these systems. In the current market, the value of the world's education is highly skeptical. All are saying the same message. You have been lied to. And so it's interesting that, most of us spent, the first 20 years of our life in school, but don't come out with any practical knowledge to help us succeed in the world. How many of these skills do we possess? How many skills, if we do possess them, came from standard universities, from educational systems? Almost none. And this is the importance. We need to be taught what really matters, and that is actually in God's lesson book, is in nature. We need to go to the true classroom, the true schoolroom, and that's where we will find true education. It's because we are Egyptian slaves that we have had really our sovereignty taken away. We're forced into industrial supply chains, but we need to revolt. We need to come out of Egypt. We cannot reach this promised land while in captivity. We are on borders of the heavenly Canaan, Ellen White says. God will part the waters if we prepare our hearts and move forward in faith. Remember, every time that they wanted to cross a hurdle, like the Jordan or like coming out of Egypt, they first had to put their foot in the water. And as they went in, it parted in front of them. And so many of us are saying, how am I going to get in the country? I don't have money for property. I don't have this. I don't have that. I don't have the other thing. You put your foot in the water, it'll part. If our motivation is right. And I'm going to talk about the motivation a little bit, but our motivation has to be right. This cannot be to save self. It has to be vindicate the Father. And yet, even though this is in front of us, so many of us will plead to stay in captivity. Many will now plead to remain in the cities. In the light, the harmony given to me, I'm urging people to come out of the great centers of population. Our cities are increasingly wickedness, and it's becoming more and more evident that those who remain in them unnecessarily do so at the peril of their soul's salvation. This is a salvational issue. Being in the city is a salvational issue. Ere long, there will be such strife and confusion in the cities that those who wish to leave them will not be able to. This is the problem. We all think, well, when the Sunday law comes, I'm going to wake up and I'm going to go, no, there won't be any buying and selling. We will not have the opportunity. And even if we can, how are we going to get our fruit trees going? How are we going to get our gardens in place? Right? We've got to start this process now. This stuff takes time. And by the way, even if we were to get out and do it and able to do it after the Sunday law, how are we going to witness for God during that time? If we're so focused on self-preservation, that we've got to do this now. We've got to get out of the cities, live as God has instructed us. And this is a call to make plans to exit. The angels of mercy are speaking to you now to take hold of their hands in faith and exit before it's too late. Had Lot listened as the Lord desired him, his wife would not have become a pillar of salt. Lot had too much of a lingering spirit. Let us not be like him. God has promised that he will make a way if we move forward in faith. Wherefore come out from among them, be ye separate, saith the Lord. Touch not the unclean thing. This is the message of the second angel. Come out of Babylon, spiritually, physically. This is that message. And he will receive us. You just have to do it in faith. You have to just step forward in faith. He will receive us. Will it be easy? No. I tell you right now, I've done this 3 times already. I already left the city, went up to Northern California, did it. Then I went to Romania, had to start all over. I'm only finally at the point where I feel like, okay, there's a little bit of breathing room. But it's hard work. There's no lie. But it's satisfying work. And what we learn doing that work is true education. The wisdom of any human agent is not sufficient in the planning and devising this time. So spread every plan before God with fasting. I'm not calling on us to make rash decisions. We talked about this earlier. Urgency. Urgency is not panic. Urgency is moving forward in deliberate steps. We need to humble our soul before the Lord. We need to commit our ways to him. Ask, Lord, I want to do this. Would you support this? Lord, I want to do this. I have this on my heart. Would you support this? And the promise is, the sure promise, God cannot lie. He will direct our paths. If in this opportune time, the members of the churches would come humbly before God, putting out their hearts, all that's wrong, and consulting him with every step, he will manifest himself to them and will give them courage in him. God will give us the courage we need to do this, but we need a little bit of faith first. And faith can start with hope. Start a little hope, little faith. It's all rooted in love. To every man was given the work according to his several ability. And this is what we're going to talk about in a little bit. But let him not move hesitantly, but firmly, humbly trusting in God. We're going to talk about several ability in a little bit, but the lesson here is that we've already been given our mission. And it just, when I hear people say to me, well, what's God's will for my life? Well, once you start with the fact he's already told us to be a country living, he's already told us for true education. He's already told us the health message. He's already told us, understanding our Bible so we can then give the three angels' messages, and developing our characters so we can live the three angels' messages. Outside of that, I don't think God cares if you're a plumber or a lawyer. He will use you in any field. Now, do I think he's placed several abilities towards us? Yes. And I think that if we understand those abilities, we'll be far better off positioned. But that's not the focus. Our temporal jobs are not what God cares about. We're already told where we need to be, what we need to be doing, who we need to be, and we're already told why we need to be doing it. So how we do it, I guess that's kind of almost our free will. We just got to think about what has God told us and move forward in this. And that's why we need such a mindset shift. We truly need a different mindset than we have today. So what is this mindset? The first thing is, do not consider it a great deprivation that you must go into the hills and mountains, but seek that retirement where you can be alone with God and learn his will and way. Do not seek it as deprivation. Look, last couple of years, I've been living in this cabin I can't even stand up in. Okay? It's pretty sad. Okay? Do I call it a deprivation? I won't. It's because of this. Okay? But what I'm trying to tell you is, it's not luxury, especially starting off. But that is that dependence on God. Remember again, it's going to be a radical shift, especially if we're rooted in worldly mindsets. If we have an Egyptian mentality, it's going to be a culture shock to leave Egypt, right? But it's going to be far less of a culture shock to leave Egypt now than it will be when it's complete chaos. This is calm. I know it seems crazy, but this is the calm before the storm. We really need to be thinking about how can we make orderly steps out of the city.
And I don't think that it takes that long. Like, when we give God permission to change our taste buds, he will change them.
Yes, no question.
I remember when I went into the jungle, and there was no electricity and no running water, and we had to bathe in the river and cook over fires. And I lived that way for half a year. And after about 3 months, we went up the river to some people who had a house on the river, and they were funded by this organization, so they had an actual house.
Sure.
With actual plumbing, and I hadn't seen it for 3 months. And I went into the kitchen, and I was like, wow, what's it?
It becomes almost foreign.
I was like, what is this? My mind was so changed to hauling water with a bucket. And in that moment, I was thankful because I was like, Lord, you've actually betrayed my mind to appreciate simplicity. Like what's known to us was now a luxury in my mind, and a non-needed one at that.
Yes.
I was so thankful for that. Like God, he can do it if we're just willing to go.
We must be willing for that simplicity. That's not to say that we're going to live in this weird abject poverty, right? No, but I believe it's going to be for a season. When I first got the property, we're pumping water. I mean, we out of a little river that's downstream from a fish farm. It's not great water. And that was what I showered in for the first year and a half, right? And by the way, it would freeze all the time. So even the fact of having water is a luxury, right? You don't think about that. Now we got a well, everything's coming around right now, right? Everything's gonna be good now. But I mean, you got to understand that it's like this. Remember the eye of the needle, right? And so Jerusalem has a gate. It's called the eye of the needle. It's just a really thin gate. And the camels and stuff, the donkeys, they had to take the packs off because they can only fit through without packs. But imagine like an actual needle. I truly believe, and I've experienced this in my life, I had a lot of stuff. And when I came out of that, I had to walk away from all of it, literally stripped down to just meat going through this thing. And on the other side is where we find the peace. right? So it's like if we want to carry everything we have with us into the country, and by the way, there's another object lesson. This is completely random. So we were actually in a pretty nice house in Timisoara, and we started collecting a lot of stuff. And then we go out and say, okay, hey, would you be willing to come out here and run this training program? Okay, sure. So we went out there, and little teeny microscopic shed of a house that we were staying in, and we had tons of stuff from this like kind of luxury apartment from Timisoara. And like that stuff has been a burden of mine. It's just so weird. All those things have been a burden of mine because they're just taking up so much space. And so I keep building like a shed for like literally everything. Like I have a shed just for this, I have a shed just for that. Like we literally built a shed just for like chairs. Like we just like I put everything in a box. But the point simply is like, well, I don't understand that so much of we think, oh, I need to build up all this stuff before I go out there. You're almost better off not. You need some tools. You're gonna need some good tools. But outside of that, you do not want the clutter. It is just, it's actually a burden to you at the beginning. Yeah.
Talking about mindset, something that I realized along the way, and I'm not saying that my mindset is all there, by the way. I'm just saying that it's better to know how to do something and then use conveniences than to have conveniences and use them without knowing how to do the
That's so true.
So like, because I had to wash my clothes by hand for 6 months, I don't need a washing machine.
Right.
So I can use a washing machine now freely, knowing if I don't have one, I'm not hindered.
Right.
And that's the same with everything else. Like if we know how to eat off the land, then we can eat more things without being hindered. But if my convenience is my norm, then when it comes to me having less, I'm
how do I do it?
Yeah, I'm gonna be stuck.
And this is why we got some, so I invested in some nice tools at Baravoy. So this idea of being acclimated to a dishwasher and then be like, I don't know how to wash a dish, right? We had the same thing. It's like I teach the guys sometimes like, hey, you can't use the nail gun. And they're like, well, I want to use the nail gun. It's like, just go use a hammer, dude. You got to know how to use a hammer. If you don't know how to use a hammer, like you can't use the nail gun, Everyone wants to use a nail gun. I don't know why. So the idea is this. We should not be thinking about this as some sort of drudgery. Think about it as a journey, it's an adventure. Do not consider privation when you're called to leave the cities and move out in the country places. Because why? Here await rich blessings for those who will grasp them. We have to hold on to this, grab hold of this beautiful blessing. By beholding the scenes of nature, the works of the Creator, by studying God's handiwork, imperceptibly we'll be changed in the same image. But again, there's this rich blessing waiting for us. It's exciting. We see God has surrounded us with nature's beautiful scenery to attract and interest the mind. We're to study the book of nature. We're to useful labor and association of life to find a lesson in divine truth. So we really looking at the importance of true education. If true education, if its study is in nature, can we do true education in the city? It's hard. We can learn some things, but we're not going to learn the lessons that we all need. And this is why country living is truly so critical. It is the classroom. So country living is the classroom of character development. It is the classroom of God. Here among the scenes of nature, Christian character is more easily formed than in the wickedness of city life. Again here, rich blessings. These are our lessons. Go where we can look upon the works of God, find rest and beauty of nature. And so this is where we kind of come down to is we have to accept, we either give up the convenience of the city so we can develop a stronger connection with God by being in the surrounding. We have to have one or the other. Either we have the convenience of the city or we have a connection with God and his blessings. And again, it always comes down to trust. Do we trust God or distrust him? And we say, well, how am I going to come in the city? I have a family. I have all these. Look, I don't have all the answers for you, but God does. I may not have a plan on how you're going to get out. I'm not the puzzle master. God is the puzzle master. If you go to him in prayer, whatever your situation is, he will have a place. But just remember, this decision of whether in the city or the country is a salvational one. This decision really rests in, do we eat of the knowledge of the tree of knowledge and evil? Or do we eat from the tree of life? Do we trust God? Or do we distrust God and trust in human reasoning? We have to choose. The same with our education. Do we choose true education in the country or worldly knowledge of the sons of men? And this will result in either the mark of the beast or the seal of God. We go back to Lot. We find Lot could have preserved his family from many evils had he not made his home in this wicked, polluted city. But you say, I need to be in the city for city evangelism. This is what we say. I need to be in the city. I want to evangelize. How does it say? All that Lot and his family did in Sodom could have been done even if they had lived in a place some distance from the city. That was Enoch's method. Now, as never before, we need to understand the true science of education. And if we fail to understand this, we'll never have a place in the kingdom of God. We need to trust in God. Trust that God has our interests in mind. And when we go into the countries, some of the most important things we're going to learn, self-control, but also self-reliance. Now, we already talked about this. I just want to refresh our mind one last time. Self-reliance is not about having money. It's not about being rich. Self-reliance, and again, we use the analogy of we're swimming out in the middle of the ocean, nothing in sight, right? What do we want? We want land. What do we want? We want water. We want trees, right? These are all the primary wealth. From those tangible assets, we can then make our manufactured goods. We can then have our gardens that are going to create our food, our timber that's going to create our houses, right? Our water that can even create our power, air, and then from that will then create intangible wealth. But that intangible wealth is just to pass or to transfer in order to then buy more primary wealth. We should not be trying to hold on to intangible wealth. And so this system has been inverted by the money men. We already talked about this. The money men are buying up our farmlands. The money men have inverted this. We need to think about barter systems. We're going to talk more about outposts later on. So we need to focus on real assets, not intangible wealth. Seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and God will give us all to us. I truly believe that we need to have our faith in God. We need to be focused on God, not creating, buying a bunch of crypto. Those crypto need to be converted into real assets. And with this, we need to be getting land. Educate our people to get out of the cities into the country. I'm educating right now. Get out of the cities into the country where they can obtain a small piece of land and make their home for themselves and for their children. Now, while this seems obvious, when the no buy, no sell comes, we will not be able to buy country property. Our money will be worth nothing. Our retirements, our 401ks, our investments will be worth nothing. This is why we need land today. Now, some people are going to say, well, I followed this in the 80s. I got out there, my parents, we had land in the 80s, Yes. But if we haven't done it. Oh, I thought we did the presentation already. No, we haven't done that one yet. The 4 generations. I showed it to Nella. That's what it was. When we understand the generations, the 3rd and 4th generation was accursed generations. We're now in the rebirth. We're now in Joel 2. Before we were in Joel 1. Since 2004, we're in the 5th generation. And so we need to understand that we need to get land. We need to be investing in this. And there's a beautiful promise that comes with this. We read that fathers and mothers who possess a piece of land and a comfortable home will be living like kings and queens. In Romania, I have all these students come to me and they're like, "Oh, I want to get out of the city. I want to get in the city." And I'm like, "Once you learn about how to build houses, I want to. I'm talking about what kind of we're going to put in. I don't want to live like my grandma." And I said, "Your grandma's going to live like a queen. The infrastructure, the old infrastructure with the fireplaces that have that kind of, that block fireplaces that retains heat. The country's infrastructure is fantastic. That's the infrastructure we need. They're not connected to gas. It's all like natural stuff. That, in one way, Romania is going to be set up for the time of trouble. It's going to have great infrastructure, really good infrastructure. But we got to cultivate the land. It's not just about having it. If the land is cultivated, it will, with the blessings of God, supply your necessities. So you wonder, how are we going to handle the food shortage that's coming this year, next year? I don't know. But I really believe the next pandemic will be a food crisis. You think, well, how do we have a food crisis? We got so much food. No, the guys got the money men. They got the farmlands. Monsanto is making sure that you cannot buy seeds other than theirs, and they're prosecuting you when you cross-pollinate anything. So again, I want to ask and reinforce one more time. Would you rather make the move now out of love or later out of fear? Do we want to make this move now? The second lesson is start small. This means we need to educate our people to get out of the country, right? Get out of the cities into the country where they can obtain a small piece of land. Now, notice I didn't say get out of the country and get 40 acres. She says a small piece of land. Like, I've got equivalent of like a couple acres. It's way too much. Legitimately, to really maintain it. Now, it's not too much to have a buffer. And but I'm saying, if you can get big land because you want that buffer. But I'm saying to actually work it, half an acre's enough to work for an individual. I'm not talking about selling.
I used to be on half an acre, and it was more than enough.
Yes.
For a garden, a play area for the children.
Yeah.
I still have room.
Yeah. Now, if you can get more, get more.
Yeah.
But I'm saying don't wait to get more, because I'm going to talk about that in a second. So
Shouldn't we also be thinking about for the others?
we definitely do need to think about it. That's what I'm getting at too. What I'm saying though is, I'm talking to my students, right? I'm talking to people who are saying, I don't have money for this. Look, in Romania, you can get a little piece of land for like $2,000, $5,000. Just get it. Okay. Is it great? It's a baby step, man. Get a tricycle before you get a bike. Okay. Because you also think the idea that you can always sell it. Land usually does not depreciate in value. How many people are waiting to their dream house before they get out? They think, well, I need to have this. I'm gonna have to plan for my kids, and I'm gonna have. He's like, just get a little piece, get a little something that you can put your shovel in, and no one can tell you not to dig. That's my knowing that if it's a piece of land or not. If you can dig a hole, and no one can tell you not to dig a hole, then that's your piece of land, right? So many of us are going after things that are maybe almost unachievable, because the American dream is now unachievable, almost intentionally. Focus on something, reset our expectations. Let's do something that's below our financial solution, something we can afford now. We think, well, I'm gonna get a loan. Then how are you gonna pay it back? You still don't own it, right? Loan does not mean you don't own it with a loan. Just buy what you can buy. Start small, build it up. Now all of a sudden it's appreciating value. Now you can sell that to somebody who's in the same position as you were, and then use that to buy something bigger and grow. We read here this idea of resetting our expectations. Do not despise small beginnings. You've been faithful over little, God will give you much more. One who is faithful in very little is also faithful in much. Do small things to your best ability. You get this concept? I mean, get a little piece of land and sleep in your car, sleep in your van. You're saying, Rob, that's hardship. Hey, it's a start. Then build a cabin. There's a guy, he's on, I'm trying to remember his name. No, anyways, I'll move past it. The Lord didn't remind his name, I'll move past it. But there's a lot of examples of people, right, who are like out there, they're doing things. Will Survives. You guys watch Will Survives? Dude's a nutball, but man, he's dedicated. He just goes out there, and it shows what someone can do with perseverance. He started actually in government land, like BLM land, and then like just started building houses in the forest, like cutting out trees and building houses. And then he got kicked off, and then he went somewhere else. Now he's with this other guy's place, and he literally just starts from ground up. And all of a sudden, you now see, boom, he's got like a full-fledged shack. It's really nice. So this is the. What's that?
Scott Mitzema?
Oh, sure.
Yeah, he lived in a mobile home or trailer home for the longest time.
No shade in that.
Yeah, and now he's building his house. Same thing with transportation guy.
That's what I was to say. The Chias, they go.
Yeah, the Chias.
I feel a wheat field.
Yeah.
And drove onto it with the moving truck. And
The Chias are a great
that's all
example.
they had. They just lived in that for like a year and a half as they were building this small thing.
Yeah.
They just made it.
And now some people are going to say, why would you want to do that when you can sleep, be in a nice house? And it's like, well, you're on the mission. You're on the path at that point. And this is also, by the way, the same advice, generally speaking, that the world gives. If you look through the right lens, right, they're giving the same advice. Buy a fixer-upper, build equity, do it yourself. Yes, buy cash, a fixer-upper. You got strength, you're a young dude, fix it up, sell it, flip it, get something bigger, flip it, get something bigger. Don't buy things, buy things within your means, right? Make strategic investments, improving fixer-uppers, live below your means in a modest home, right? Demonstrate how to build one house at a time. All these people who the world looks to as successful have the same concept. So the idea is it's steps. Do things practically. Manage them in manageable pieces. Right? So it's this idea here. We want to shape our mindset and skills. We're going to get some land, put in your infrastructure, your orchards, then build a small cabin, right? And then build a house. And when you build the house, the small cabin could be for a garden worker. But you got to think about the timing, because we're in 2025 already. Okay, I actually had to update these slides because I had some older dates. That's sad. Okay, so year one, get some land, and then we'll be able to get something bigger that we can hold more people and do more ministry. I do believe, though, that if you do small things, God will reward that. And as we're doing small steps, God may allow us to then skip into bigger steps once we do these smaller steps. And so we truly have to start small, though. We cannot be waiting for this. Because if we wait another year and it's 2026 and if right now we're getting our mindset skills together, you see how something just fell off the end there? Watch this. If we got our mindset skills going quick and we can get land this year, we're going to get that big house. But if we wait, then we're going to settle for a small cabin. And if we wait longer, we're going to settle for a tent and an orchard. You get this concept, right? This concept is there is an end of time, and it's not these dates, right? These are just dates. But the longer we wait, the less opportunity there's going to be. And this is the lesson to be learned. God's promise also that we will have land for free or significantly discounted if we put our service in Him. And we're going to talk about Outpost in just a little bit. And when we start talking about Outpost, it's the order of things that matter. So if we're trying to get some property for ourselves selfishly, like we talked about earlier, just for ourselves, do you think God's going to give that? No. But when you do it for others, God will just give it to you. We're to be wise as serpents and harmless as doves in our efforts to secure a country property at the lowest figure. Wise as serpents and gentle and harmless as doves, securing the lowest figure. And from these outposts, we are to work the city. She doesn't call it a homestead. She says from these outposts. So this is a place that we are to be doing God's work. Let men of sound judgment be appointed to go around, search for properties in rural districts, right? And what was here. So where the secure buildings may be as a gift from the owners or purchased at a reasonable rate by the gifts of our people. Do you get that again? If we're doing this, these buildings may be secured as a gift from the owners. God has been working on the hearts of people, moneyed men that are in God's service. That if we have the right heart, if we have the right mission, we say, okay, Lord, I don't want this for myself. Lord, I promise it's yours. I will work it for you. I will be a steward for you. You've given me talents. I'll be a steward of those, because we don't own those either. We do not own our talents. Give me a piece of land to let me work the talents. If you don't have it, there's something wrong. If you don't have it, it's either one, we're not ready, and we'll talk about that in a second, or two, we have the wrong heart.
Yeah, I know that the Lord gave us that miracle of the quiet land to show us that this is real. Because we can read this and not. Anyway, I just want to encourage everybody that it's real. Like it happens. Land does drop out the sky.
Yes. Yes. If I'm not finding land for free or discounted, is it because I have the wrong intentions? It's a question we should be asking. Many of us are searching for land, but some of us aren't searching at all. But those that are, if we don't get it, it's because there's a reason. And this is where we start getting this concept of ministry first. This is the third lesson for today. The third lesson for today is ministry first. One of the requirements we hear of a homestead. So we're going to define a homestead. Okay? A homestead is an isolated dwelling, but we're not talking in the middle of the mountains, right? It has to be close enough to attack, right? Far enough to shield, but close enough to attack. We're going to talk about that. A homestead is an isolated building, especially a farmhouse or adjacent outbuildings, typically in a large agricultural, such as a ranch or station. We call this a homestead. The purpose of the home, so it's a home outside the city. The purpose of this, to educate our people to get out of the cities, obtain a small place of home and a home for them and their children. So this is a home. A homestead is a home. Pretty straightforward. Let's keep going. The purpose of a homestead is because in the future, the problem of buying and selling will be a serious one. So they can raise their own provisions. So the second purpose of homestead is provide for the self and the family. Third definition, we need to protect ourselves from enemies. Get out of the cities, we're not crowded together, so we're out of the interference of our enemies. Okay. Next definition, this is to grow closer to God. The purpose of a homestead is to bring us in direct contact with the work of God in nature. So these are reasons of why to have a homestead. Fathers and mothers who possess a piece of land are comfortable as kings and queens, right? But what are we seeing from this little formula of what a homestead is? What's the focus?
Yeah.
The focus of a homestead oftentimes is just self. Remember, we talk a lot about what is our motivation, right? So we talk about this concept. We talked this many times, right? So at the top, we ask a question, why am I doing this? We ask why again, why again, why again? And if we ask it enough, it's going to root into something that is real. It's going to be self-preservation or self-exaltation. I want to get a piece of land in the country so I can be a YouTube star and I can show everybody about my garden. Exaltation. I want to get a piece of property in the country so I can ensure that when the famine hits, because Rob's telling me there's going to be a famine next, and that's what I'm saying. When the famine hits, I'll be safe. Self-preservation. We should not be driven by self, not by self-preservation, not by self-exaltation. What are we driven by? Others, driven by love, because that is other-centeredness. And we're going to talk a lot about that. But the idea is that a homestead is not an outpost. People say, oh, I have an outpost. No, you have a homestead. You don't have an outpost. We need to be thinking about others more. The focus must include a ministry, because if there's no ministry, there's no outpost. And that's why our assignment yesterday and last night was to think about, what is our ministry? What are we focused for? Why are we here? Who do we serve? What problem do we solve? I really believe that we need to know who we serve and who we solve. Now, these slides, by the way, these are old slides, so this is nothing personal. Okay? This is just old slides. But I believe that if we look at it in this order, that a homestead plus a ministry, I think, is a broken outpost. I think if you take a homestead mentality and you try to add in a ministry, just kind of like force it in there, you've got a broken outpost. Yes, of course. Enoch had an outpost because his whole thing was ministry. He was
also wanted to preserve himself from contaminated by the word?
It must.
So was it a homestead or an outpost, or was it
Enoch?
The purpose, his mindset was he's preserving to not to be contaminated so that he can give a pure message like John the Baptist, that he can take all the people back into the country.
Right. So the question is wanting to secure, be preserving yourself, is that selfish? I'll ask the question like this. Do we want works? Do we want to have works? Yes. But do our works come out of our own righteousness or out of righteousness by faith? The result is works. The idea is it's always the order of things. There's nothing wrong with a homestead. It's the order of things. If we start a homestead, because this is literally what I came to. I won't say where. Tell you guys. This is literally what I came into. There was a group of people. They're all there hiding out from the city. Either they didn't want to work or I don't know what it was. And then none of them were on the same page about the mission. And so when I started to force the process of like, hey, like we got to figure out what our mission is, nobody was on the same page with mission. And now they're all disbanded, essentially, except for one who's amazing. What I'm trying to say here is that if you come into something with, we're going to bring us all a bunch of people together and we're going to like just randomly bring everybody together, and you go, so, okay, everyone's here, was here led by our God. I believe that. But if we don't have the same mission, then it's a broken outpost. We need clarity on why we're here, who we're serving, and really clear clarity on that. Otherwise, it's a broken formula. Yes.
Yeah. Along on the same lines what you're saying, Tash, I see it like us begging for bread.
Yes.
The person that was begging for bread was not begging for himself. Like the God gave me a word to give to somebody else, but I'm gonna get a word in the same time. But I'm not asking for the word for myself. So if I'm like, Lord, help me to establish an outpost. I mean, a homestead, because some other people need to come in here and understand how I'm living. I have to live that way for them to come in and understand it. But my purpose is not self-preservation. But in the process, I'm gonna be preserved. But that's not my goal. That's not
Right.
Was that like Enoch's?
Yes, that's what he's doing. So he had the homestead, but the purpose was to get them out of fire, to get them out of the city. But he had to have an outpost to do that. His purpose wasn't I'll save
So the
myself.
why is selfless.
The why has to be
always
selfless. Yes.
Yeah.
If the why is rooted in self, then you have a broken formula. And this is literally what it says. The sin is indulged in the greatest extent, which separates us from God and produce many contagious spiritual disorders, is selfishness. Though there can be no returning to the Lord except through self-denial. So if our motivation for anything is selfishness, then it's a broken system. That's it. Now, do we want to be preserved from the world? Yes, we're told we have to be. Come out of her, right? We just did a whole formula. Those are quotes by Ellen White, by the way. If we go back, the formula for an outpost, these are all Ellen White quotes. So are these selfish? No. The reason for these things, we have to figure out what the reason for these things are. And it's the order that matters. I want to do works. I can't do works of my own, but I want to do works. I need faith to do works, right? If you have faith, the works will follow. And so I believe that if we have a mission for others, we'll realize I need to have a garden to share food. I need to have more rooms to share. Yes.
I think God will take us all to the place where we walk through the cities and our heart breaks for the people. Because when you're studying with somebody in their house and their house is like a hovel and they're saying, I just wish I could live healthfully, I just wish I could understand how to grow this food. And the one thing I want to be able to say to them is, come to my house. That's the one thing I want to be able to say to them because I'm
come and see.
Breaking.
Yes.
And I don't know how to help to get them out of their situation, but I can just say, come to my house, just come live here for a while. You can get it, you can get help, and you can learn how to do it. And the God will give,
Yes, I'm with you. And so we just need to understand that the sin which separates us from God is selfishness. The reason Christ has not returned is selfishness, period. So we need a ministry first. We need to come together on why we're here, what our purpose is, how we're going to achieve it, and then we form a homestead that makes sure that we can sustain that purpose. The homestead is there to sustain the ministry, not the other way around. That is an outpost. But even this can be unsustainable. And so there's one more factor in an outpost. It needs to be sustainable. And that's why we need a business. So the formula for an outpost is a ministry plus a homestead plus a business. We find that these are sanitariums, schools, and various forms of offices, media publication, literature evangelism. In this day and age, literature evangelism can be even a YouTube channel. We read, we are to work the outposts, work the cities from outposts, institutions for the publication of our literature, that's our offices, the healing of the sick, that's our sanitariums, and for the training of workers are to be established outside the cities. So there's our formula. We like formulas, right? There's our formula of an outpost. We need all those ingredients. If we do not have those ingredients, we're not truly an outpost. We capture that? If you want to be an outpost, you need all three of those ingredients. Now, some of those can be less than others. But I believe in the sense of there may be less focus on one, less focus on the other, but there needs to be a touch of all of those. Even from my perspective is, I know I need to bring in to Baravoy, I need to bring in someone who's doing some form of healing, whether that's just even doing a health message, right? It doesn't even have to be this complex, huge sanitarium. It could be somebody who's just focused on ensuring that we eat right, the culture. That's also a piece of this. And then getting that out into and bringing people into our home and then getting that message out. We see the same exact, by the way, this is not a formula from one slide. We're going to see the same formula in everything that she says. She says our institutions the instruction is still being given. Move outside the cities, establish your sanitariums, your schools, and your offices. It's the same exact formula one more time. It all fits. These are the three pillars. I believe that the medical ministry is the right hand of the gospel. I believe the business is the left hand of the gospel. And I believe the true education and gardening and agriculture is the come and see. It's the one of the impetus of why they can see how God's way is different. And so for me, this is why I'm trying to create Advent centers. I want to create Advent centers where their entire purpose of the center starts with vindicating the Father's name first. It doesn't start with at the root of like, we want to train people. No, we start at the end. We need to think about, why are we here? We're here to vindicate the Father. In order to do that, we've got to build our characters. In order to do that, I need true education. But to do that, I need to be in the country. But to do that, I need to have some sustainability. So there's different ways to sustain. I can then be selling treatments, sanitarium type work. I can be, I guess, charging for the school is another thing. I can also be running different type of businesses, literature, offices. Right? The idea is like those things at the bottom, those are flexible. But where it goes is it has to be fixed. So I don't want to spend too much time on the bottom stuff until we agree this is where we want to go. If we don't want to be part of the 144,000, you're not belonging in an Advent Center. That's what our purpose is there. But the methods, whether it's agriculture or whatever the method is, prison ministries, whatever the method is, those are flexible, so long as the end goal is the same. That's the idea. In God's design, that our people should locate outside the cities and from these outposts. So outposts are there to what? Warn the cities. That's the role. So when we think about watchmen versus light bearers, the top part is the light bearer, but then we have to take that light out in the cities. Do not be a candle held under a bushel. You get that, right? We can't be a candle under a bushel. Let your light so shine before men. So but we have to first develop the light. Where do we develop light? In the homestead. How do we sustain the homestead? With a business. But why are we even there in the first place? Because we want to work the cities. We want to do what God has asked us to do. And that is what truly brings us into a space where we understand we're doing God's will. So from these outposts, warn the cities. There must be a force of influence in the cities to give a message of warning. But that warning, what she says, has a certain tone. The warning must have a certain tone, she says. And that tone ultimately is the light bearer. So, message of warning. Also guarding. So what is an outpost? In a historical definition, it's a small military camp or position at some distance from the main army, used especially as a guard against a surprise attack. So the role of an outpost is to what? Guard and attack, right? It's to shield and to attack. So we must be far enough away from the city. You ask me, how far should I be out of the city? Just far enough, right? You don't have to be hours and hours out of the city. Just far enough to shield. That's what she says. And close enough to attack. Because if we are so far removed, we are not going to be able to do anything in terms of the message of warning. But if we're so close, we're not going to be able to shield ourselves from the contamination of the world. We're again far enough to shield, close enough to attack. We must make wise plans to attack the cities, to warn them. At the same time, live where we can shield our children and ourselves. There's a formula again. Far enough away to shield and close enough to warn the cities, close enough to attack. But again, we need sustainability. And this is the lesson we had the last 2 days in the mornings. And that was this idea that that outpost needs to generate some revenue. That outpost needs to generate revenue. And that means that we need to think about how do we bring money in. So there's external, internal forces. We already talked about this. We've come up with our list already of some ideas we had. I'm excited to hear how the conversation last night went and how that is playing out. But the idea we already talked about in the last 2 days is external, additional, or external, internal, meaning that these are additional things. Somebody has to actually run this thing to start doing this. Or it's a byproduct. And I really think that we are not thinking about byproducts enough. We need to train our minds to think about byproducts. What am I doing every day? And is this something somebody else wants? It could be a YouTube account, right? It could be a Patreon account. It could be things that you're just like, hey, here's some content I'm putting out. If you love it, continue to sponsor it. It's just some ideas that kind of go along with that. Ultimately, we do understand that business and religion have been joined by God. They're the same thing. And so we need to integrate that into the ministry. We need to make sure that our ministry has some sort of business component to it, because it's the same thing. And then finally, we need to know the time. And I've done enough talk about time. I'm not going to talk about time today, but you guys know the time, right? We understand how short it is. And so the understanding is that there's 3 levels, right? The first one is the city mission. That is what we're doing now. That's a preview of the full demonstration of what we have at the Outpost. So the Enoch mission is we've got the Outpost, and right now we need outposts to warn the cities. There will be a point in time when the time of trouble gets so bad that we're no longer safe to be there, right? This is going to be called Jacob's time of trouble. And then that Jacob's time of trouble, that little time of trouble, when that happens, we then actually even just walk away from our outposts, and we're going to go in the mountains. It would be nice if we had something out there to go to, but not all will. Some will literally be living out there and be fed by angels. So the idea simply is that there's kind of 3 fronts to the battle, right? The city missions, the outposts, and then later the retreat. Do not be getting a retreat now. Do not be putting our money and investing in retreats now. We need to be investing in outposts that are close enough to attack. Because if you're on a hill, then you're a light on a bushel. Again, that's what I believe is the formula for Advent centers. And I'm kind of working on this little thing here. It was just kind of left there. But this idea of making it through a restore, develop, and realize, which I think is kind of interesting, but it's not fully fleshed out yet. Now, I want to spend the last few minutes we have talking about the idea of manpower and finances and spiritual walk with Christ. Because there are challenges that are going to come with country living. There's no question. And so some of these challenges is this idea that it feels like when you have a farm, especially a big one, you've never got enough help. It's like, dude, I need more manpower. It's like, can never have enough help. That's my experience anyways, right? Whether it's infrastructure, whether it's even just managing the manpower that you have potentially. But more than that, it's going to be things like, well, do we have certain types of crops? Do we have even livestock at this point? A lot more work. There's almost unlimited work. When I came out of the city, I felt like my entire day was doing manpower work. I call this the hand, right? And the hand work takes up all my time. And I didn't feel like my heart was being developed further. And I definitely didn't feel like the finances were being developed. And that was the first thing. But even if you're able to manage the workload, like I said, finances can be a problem. And balancing that, whatever it is, office work or whatever type of work we're doing while maintaining the land is a massive struggle. You can be thinking about how you can do this maybe with CSAs and other things we talked about before. But even if you're able to cover your finances, do we have time for God? Do we have time for a personal walk with God? And then do we have time for evangelism? Because if we're not doing that, we're living a life for self. And I know I talk a lot about, evangelism being the outworking of this. It is, but it's a critical component. Because if you don't have a mission, if you're not doing evangelism, you're back to being a homestead. And that's not, I don't believe is within lines of what God wants. The thing is, we have to understand our individual limitations. We have to accept that we cannot do everything on our own. And I believe there's a different model. I believe there'll be a different order of how things are brought in. When we think about living in the country, it always seems like we're juggling. It's a full-time responsibility. But we read that, right, in Life Sketches 4:10, she says, at the same time, we must actively minister to the city. So we have to balance the farmland and at the same time do the cities. That's a lot of work, as Life Sketches 410. Now, this seems like a tough balance, more than even a couple can do. And so when I hear people and they're talking about, oh, they're giving advice to young couples, go out there, get a land in the middle of nowhere. Don't be with other families. I hear these things. I have a whole course I'm not going to bring it up here because we don't have time, but I have a whole course literally just on, should we be with others or not? And what is Ellen White's counsel on that? Because people say, oh, you shouldn't, don't be grouping together with others. Yeah, she says, I can share that later if we want, but it's a really powerful study. I literally went into the census data and it showed, and I'm getting way ahead of myself now, but the census data actually shows that an average family then was like 8 to 12 people, right? And now an average family is like 1.5, right? So the point is that when she said even then, and by the way, the 2-3 family thing, if you, I may have to actually do the course, but okay, there's a bit of it. Okay, it's really interesting.
That's the dilemma I had back in Tennessee.
All right, I'm gonna go ahead and find it. I'm gonna bring it up.
The Amish understood something.
Yeah, they did.
Yeah, they did.
They
Yeah,
got
they
it.
The reason why they make so many children.
Like seriously, man.
Free labor.
No, but we're also told that in the last days we are dealing with the children. So we have to understand
The
that.
counsel is if you cannot take care of them, don't make them.
That's one aspect. That's one aspect.
But the
Here's some text on that actually. Well, let me come back to this in 1 second because I want to finish. I just want to get to a stopping point here first, and I'll come back when there. The point is this: we need to embrace the diversity of gifts. Let not one man feel that his gifts alone is sufficient for the work of God. We need to come together, and hopefully that's what we understood last night. Is this idea we need to come together. One strong on some essential point where another is weak. People are doing different things, different jobs, different functions. We need to embrace a diversity of gifts. Some are speakers, writers, praying, singing, clearness of mind, power, faith, wisdom, knowledge. The idea that these aren't even physical gifts. Some of these gifts that we need to embrace are spiritual diversity. We need to embrace a spiritually diversified group as well as a physically diversified group and a mentally diversified group. To every man was giving his work according to his several ability. We're all going to have different things we're bringing to the table. Someone in ministry should not. So here's one. Those who enter the ministry engage in a special work and should give themselves to prayer and to the speaking of the word. Their minds should not be burdened with business matters. Did you know that? Some people should not be thinking about business, and other people should be, right? That's how it works. That's why God brings us all together. God never designed that as a rule, his servant should go singularly to labor. Is Outpost work? Is that labor for God? Okay. Are we supposed to then go out there and be on our own?
no.
No? Okay. It takes a community. The Lord desires his chosen servants to learn how to unite together in harmonious effort. Outposts are intentional communities. So one more thing the devil stole from us is intentional communities. We need the hand, the heart, and the head. We need all roles. Now Danella's happy. So I actually have this tool. I'm not ready to launch it yet, release it. I need to get things situated, but hopefully maybe we'll have maybe something's going to come out of this, who knows, but I actually have already developed the application that will go through this. In fact, actually it's here. Right, if I, oops, I'm not sure why it's not popping up here, but it's literally here. Yeah. So it literally goes this whole thing. And again, this site's not ready to be, we're not ready to launch this site yet. So don't everybody go to the site because it's not ready to launch. But it literally, I mean, this whole thing is already built out. It's just not ready to launch yet. And all the different roles. We need these are head roles: planning, vision and mission, right? Governance, readiness, design and architecture, research and development. Right? These are all roles that we need there. We need processes, workplace safety, legal, finances. This is why I want to create back offices. I want admin back offices, personnel management, administrative, communication. These are all the roles that are on an outpost. The thing is, everyone's going to be wearing like 50 hats, right? But these are all the roles. If you had enough people on an outpost, And I'm going to talk to you how many people is enough. I'm going to talk about that. Revenue roles. Some people will be gainfully employed off, right? External employment. Some will be doing enterprises, internal employment, and others will be sponsorship, byproduct, external byproduct. We're going to have resources, inventory resources, bookkeeping, procurement, waste. Like it's a full-time, no, it's not a full-time job, but it takes me like, probably 20 minutes a week to sort the trash. I don't think any of my students want to do it. I'm the one that has to do it. But yeah, we got to sort the trash, right? I like to burn everything, man. Not everything. I like to burn anything that's paper. You know what I'm saying? Just sort it all out. Recycling everything else. Infrastructure, buildings, machinery, electronics, plumbing, right? Lands, landscaping, forestry, wildlife management, husbandry, that's with orchards and livestock, beekeeping, other beneficials. Now we're in the hand now, right? We moved from the head, now you see we're in the hand. Gardening, that's soil health, greenhouse operations, botanical, food harvesting. Then we move into interior. Now we're in food preparation, domestic chores, sewing, right? Now we move into the heart roles. These are now heart, childcare, education, mentorship, ministry roles, more heart roles, Bible workers, true education, medical ministry, missional business coaches, wellness, mental, physical, spiritual, morale roles. Somebody's in charge of music, creativity, cultural recognition programs. Somebody's involved in hospitality, operations, hygiene, marketing and promotion, right? Now there's a little bit of overlap with the head, even though it's a heart role. And volunteer connections, public relations, engagement. So you start to see how all of these roles, all of those roles, don't be overwhelmed, all those roles are needed for an outpost to be a really functioning outpost. And so I literally built essentially an entire tool. Again, don't go to the site yet. It's not ready to launch yet. But if we were to go into this thing, it's literally it gives an entire profile management in the back of this thing. It's not ready to be registered yet, but someday soon it will be. And so we have this whole thing. We can go in, we can take our own profile, right? It tells me my score. I have to take an assessment first. I can come in and take an assessment. I think it's going to break, to be honest. We'll see. I'm just going to do an autofill. Yeah, I don't think this is ready to use, so do not be using this yet. But the idea is you can go through and you can take, okay, with my experience in supporting research endeavors, I contribute to effectively do data collection. Is that you? Strongly disagree. I have successfully managed small fundraising campaigns. I rarely pay attention to safety guidelines, right? I spearheaded significant research initiatives. All these ideas here. Right? Yeah, so the idea is you go through this whole thing, and at the end of this, you can actually then save your answers, and this then actually develops an entire persona. So it will tell you what you are. Are you a hand, heart, or a head? So again, I didn't actually take this. I just did an autofill. But when you actually take it, it will tell you where your gaps are. And so I want in Advent centers, the students will take this first. They'll understand where they're at. And then as they retake this, it will show the progression. And then I can come in here and I can see, okay, here's my scores breakdown. So, I scored really high on governance, or I scored really high in communication. And with that, you're going to be able to then figure out what your training pathway is going to be. And this will then take you over to your academy. And so in the academy, it will then suggest different courses and different things based on your profile. And because in this, you can actually suggest what you want to be. So anyways, this is the kind of the tech that I've been working on. It's not ready to go live yet, but I just want you guys to know what's being worked on, right? That we have full systems. So there's a lot more to this, but in short, there's a lot of things with the hands, right? And I'm not going to go through all these quotes, but I'm going to put the slides in the thing. Wise generals understand how to select people to do the right fields of labor. They understand who's going to be right for which job. The head roles, supporting themselves by raising fruit, vegetables, and poultry. I saw that some such enterprises might be started. Market gardens, health food businesses, right? Other ideas she mentions, but self-denial is one of the main things. We always talk about how we want to make more money. We also think about how we save more money. And heart roles. It's a great mistake to keep a minister who is gifted with power to preach the gospel constantly and work in other business matters. Preachers and evangelists are set apart for another line of work. Find businessmen who will look after the financial details. This calls again to the idea of a head, a heart, and a hand. All these different roles. Now, I'm not going to get into all this here. But the point is that God is a God of order, right? We should not be doing things out of order. We need a mindset for preparation, right? Self-reliance, self-control. We need to move forward prayerfully, right? To hear the, fasting, to hear the voice of God, and have courage to take action when he tells us. So just to summarize, I'm going to do this last little piece, and I'm not going to go through the whole course, but when you look at the course on community models, there's a lot of pieces where we talk about to serve and not to be served. And I want to find that thing on the numbers. Okay, here it is right here. So there's one of the first thing is like, who's our family, right? And I think it's interesting. Jesus says, whoever does the will of the Father. I believe that when we understand Luke, it's going to say that when this time comes, people will be divided against houses. There's going to be a lot of orphans. There's going to be a lot of widows when the shaking happens, a lot. And they're going to need a place to stay. And we're going to have to come together as family. That's where my focus is. My focus is not trying to create a family right now and a big family, have my own thing. Oh, I want little Robs running all around for my own ego. No, I'm trying to create space to bring people into. And that's what an Advent Center is. It's a space that has for people in the future. Henceforth, there'll be 5 in one house divided, 3 against 2, 2 against 3. How do you not understand this is coming? In Luke, he literally says, how do you not understand that there's a time coming when we need to prepare for others to join us? And what's a modern view of families? Families are no longer like they used to be. And so we have people that are saying, well, we should be dispersed, do not colonize. He's talking about like Jerusalem. He's talking about people in massive amounts. He's talking about Battle Creek, not little outposts. We talk about the large numbers in Jerusalem. They were supposed to scatter, but they held all together in one little spot. We read that large churches, you should scatter. It's not the purpose of God that she should colonize together in large communities. So what does it mean to colonize? It's large-scale population movements. Colonization is not having a couple families at a homestead. It's always the case that when an institution is established, there are many families who desire to settle near it. This is normal. How do we quantify large communities? She says, do not crowd in one place, making the same mistake has been made in Battle Creek. And this is what people use. Well, don't have a bunch of families out here. That's against what God's will. Well, let's look at that. When she did that rebuke, Battle Creek had 13,000 residents. So if you get to 13,000 residents, you're being rebuked. Okay? This is historical census data. Right? And the point is like, this is what people don't take the time. They don't take the time to actually do the research to figure out what she was talking about. The context is everything. She says here that after that, it said that between 1 and 200 people were prepared to leave the next day. And she told, whoa, don't do anything without order. So if hundreds of people are going to leave, then yes, it's way too big. Okay? But to even have 100 people in a place is not too big necessarily. It all depends on the size. So don't let people tell you, oh, we have to have it a certain way and everyone has to be on their own. No, that's literally the devising of Lucifer. He's the one that used these psyops to break us up. And it says here, they say 1 or 2 families should work as missionaries. That's a minimum directive, not a maximum. You catch this. And the quote that everyone always uses, which drives me nuts, is this one here. It's not the best policy for 2 or 3 families. No. Read it. It's not the best policy for children of 1, 2, 3 or families. Hold on, that are connected by marriage. Why? She goes in this whole thing because if you have a family context where the siblings are picking on each other, and then those siblings have kids, that dominant brother is now going to be demasculating the father of the children. The whole article reads about that, about how you don't want to have kids looking at their dad and seeing their dad getting picked on because the dad is the image of God. So she says, if you've got brothers and you've got children and they're connected by marriage and you feel that's the case, separate them because you don't want the child seeing his dad being picked on because that's the image of God. You catch that? But people don't add the part of marriage and they don't add the part about with children, right? He's not saying don't only 2, 3 families. That's not a directive. That one there is a minimum directive. That is not even a directive unless you have a really bad uncle. You know what I'm saying? If you got a really bad uncle, you better be separated. Do not think because a large number of brethren are called to connect to publishing work that it's supposed for a large number of people to settle within their family. So again, what is a large number of people? Right? Back then it was 7, 8 children. That's what one family looked like then. right? That's one family. That's two families now, right? That's three families. So modern family, right? So again, put things in perspective. Three families then and three families now, even that doesn't mean the same as it used to. It's all about context. Anyways, so that's the short of it. There's more, but we're out of time. We'll do more of this later.
Yes.
All right. Thanks, everyone.